All right, so it's nice to see you on this lecture, although it's a surprise for me, the same as it was for you. It was just because the other guy couldn't come in, so I had very little time to prepare. But I did my best, so I just hope you find it interesting. Before we begin, I want to ask how many of you are using Git during your work? All right, nice. It was almost everyone. Is there someone that doesn't use Git? All right. And last question: has anyone heard about the trunk-based development and what it is? Oh, that's much more than I thought. All right. So a bit about me. My name is Adrian Borodziuk. For the past 7 years, I've been developing and architecting products, various products. It's mobile apps, web apps, blockchain, a bit of games as well. Currently, I work as head of development at Zapify. That's a Swedish startup founded in 2019. One of the rapidly growing in the Nordics. And I thought instead of telling you what Zapify is, I'm gonna show you. All right, I suppose that's not gonna work. Okay, let's skip this part. So we're a startup in the sales technology space. We work with big data to provide our customers with, we try to cover the whole flow of the sales process. So from finding the right people that you would want to reach out to wrapping them up to a campaign, reaching to them out through LinkedIn and email, and then hopefully booking a meeting with that client and having some insights. You could call it a lead generation tool. So in this lecture, I'd like us to answer 3 questions. How to deliver value to your customers in no time. How to avoid bottlenecks in development process. And why, And why should you even care, to deploy frequently? So I'd like to begin with a little story. There's going to be 2 characters that I'm going to introduce. Please meet Michael. Michael is a developer at eCorp. He's not a lazy person, although he very rarely pushes his code to production. On the other hand, he also hates merge conflicts. For him, that's the worst evil that can happen during his work. And unluckily for him, he's been working on a feature, a really big feature, for the past 3 months. And unfortunately, he forgot to integrate with the main branch, every day, every week. So when he finished the feature, and he was so happy that he's gonna finally merge it, and customers are gonna be able to take from the thing that he created, he saw 500 merge conflicts. And how long does it take to solve 500 merge conflicts? It's hard to say. It might be days, it might be weeks, or in some cases it might be close to impossible to actually do that. Imagine you're working on a feature, but your colleague has been working on a refactoring of some part of the service, and you didn't know about that, and his code got merged first, and now yours is completely useless. Unfortunately, this is a reality that most of us have to deal with on a daily basis. Now, the second character, that's Jack. Jack is a QA engineer at Piper. He's a very detail-oriented person. He likes to test every single detail by himself. And he's easily stressed. He cares about customers, he cares about the product, he cares about the company. So in Pied Piper, he's the person, the gatekeeper, so to call it, that checks every single line of code on staging before it actually reaches production. Whenever the release happens, he's the person responsible for making sure that it's gonna go well. That the customers can sign in, that that everything is gonna work, that there's not gonna be any catastrophe. And whenever this happens, his teammates are blaming him for that. You can imagine how he feels. He feels lonely. He feels that his work is not that relevant because sometimes it feels like it shouldn't be done. Why does someone have to be a gatekeeper, a single person and responsible for the whole team of developers? Yeah. And the third character, you probably know the mole, right? So the third character, I think that was Amazon who called it first that way. That's the release captain. How many of you work in a company that has a release captain? Basically, that's a person responsible for preparing, executing, and monitoring the release. Not that many. Okay, that's nice. That's very nice. I had this dubious pleasure to be that person, and I can tell with all certainty that you don't want to be that person. You're always called in first whenever something happens, and you leave the office last. If something bad happens during the deployment, you're the person responsible for fixing it. And who likes to sit whole night fixing a problem with the release just so you can meet the deadline? No one. So in this lecture, we'll try to fix issues of every single person that I introduced to you. And Release Captain will try to completely get rid of him. So the main question is, how often should you be deploying the code? It might be every week, every month, every 3 months, every quarter, or extreme examples of half a year release cycle. I heard about companies that actually have a half a year release cycle, and it's all great for the first 5 months. But when it comes to release the product, release the new update, the whole company is totally on fire. They sleep at the office just like at Twitter, just because everything is burning. There's so many issues. Code has been produced, but it wasn't validated against production. It was missing this feedback loop, where if you don't push your code to production and someone uses it in production, you can't be sure that it's gonna work, right? So I'm gonna say that you should deploy as often as possible. With that said, instead of having a release captain in your company and him having this dubious pleasure, you want CI/CD to be your release captain. You want to trust your CI/CD. You want every step of that to be automated. If it's not, it's very easy to make manual mistakes, right? We're all human. We do mistakes. And if a process contains a manual step in it, we introduce a chance, for an error, human error, and that's normal. So we want to get rid of it and automate as much as possible. Automation is king. And one of the main concepts in trunk-based is that things will fail. All things, maybe not all things, but things will fail eventually. In trunk-based, instead of denying the possibility of something going wrong, you're actually accepting that. And you want to prevent this happening, and you want to create processes that allow you to recover instantly from that. You can imagine that the bigger the deployment, the bigger the risk that something goes wrong. and the harder it is to debug. You can put it differently. If today, by merging your code, you introduce a bug, the longer the bug is in the code base, the harder it is for you to fix it. After a month, let's say your PR hasn't been deployed for a month, and after a month, you have literally no idea what could be causing it, right? I'm pretty sure some of you had a PR open for like 2 months, 1 month, it doesn't matter. But you remember that coming back to that code and trying to recall where did you finish and what issues were left, or some concepts that you had in mind for it to work as good as possible. You forget about it. And keeping issues in the code and not trying to fix them immediately just makes it so much harder, so much more annoying. No one wants to do that. Like you want to fix the bug as soon as you write that code, and the later it is, the less fun actually with programming. So I'd like to introduce the concept of iteration, although I'm pretty sure all of you know what an iteration is, but just to put it briefly. Iteration is a short period of time in which a section of work is developed, tested, and released. It's a building block of the software development process. And you can imagine why speed of iteration is so important. The faster you iterate, the faster you can align your product with the market, the faster you can introduce your changes, your new ideas, and of course bug fixes as well. So there's this quote from Marty Kagan, partner at Silicon Valley Product Group, that in order to create a new product that fulfills the requirements and that has its place on the market, it takes at least 50 up to 100 iterations. Many developers think that if I get the requirements right now, and in 4 months with a team of engineers, I'm gonna develop the MVP. That's it, right? The product is done, we can deploy it, and now it's gonna start earning money. And that's totally not true. You can't develop a functional working product that people love in 1 iteration. That's impossible. You have to adjust it. You have to ask your users what do they want. It might be that even though you set A is a requirement, after using the product, you realize that it's actually maybe not needed, or you want to change it to some other one. Like you have to, as a company, you have to evolve, right? You can take Netflix as an example. They did VHS, and now they do streaming. They moved, they're one of the big tech companies at the moment. And the metric we'll try to use to measure the efficiency of a team is time to production. And time to production, the moment you start tracking it, is most of the time really bad. It's, it kind of feels private to look into what's your time to production, and it's, you can expect, much higher than you think. Because every stale PR that's being open and, stuck in the review stage, or just not merged because someone isn't sure, or anything else, is gonna add up to lower time to production. So, given that, let me introduce you to the gatekeepers. I like to call it the gatekeepers, although you could call it bottlenecks as well. But for most of the things, there's always a person standing behind every issue. It might be waiting for the code review, right? If your teammate forgot about it, you're pinging him like every day, like, man, I need this merged, right? Like people are waiting, and he's like, oh, going for a 2-week vacation now. QA has to test it first. So you can't, I don't know, push a hotfix or a small feature because it has to wait in a huge backlog of your QA engineer for it to actually land on production. Some stale PRs like, I don't know how I feel about merging it, waiting for the manager. The worst one is actually the code freeze. The code freeze is when you're preparing for a release and you order the whole team not to merge anything else besides the hotfixes that are fixing the current release that we want to push. And in that moment, imagine having a code freeze for a month. That's hypothetical. Every developer is developing his code on their own without integrating with other guys. And imagine trying to merging it after that time. It might be not such an issue in small teams where there might be like one person working on each microservice or module. But imagine teams of hundreds of thousands. That's going to be so much harder and almost, maybe not impossible, but the efficiency of that team is going to go down significantly. And my favorite, release captain got drunk, where your boss comes to you on Friday and says, we need this fixed before the weekend, and you fix it. But then the only person that can release it is on a party drinking. Okay, so beginning with trunk-based. What's the trunk in trunk-based? The trunk is a very simple concept. It's basically the one single branch in a monorepo, which can consist of many projects, sometimes even not related, from which every developer branches out and to which he merges. So in trunk-based development, we don't allow stacking. Stacking is when you create a branch from another branch, right? Just like a tree, basically. Instead, in trunk-based methodology, a branch can be only very shortly lived, like a day, or a few days at worst. Also, releases can be only made from trunk. So from that moment forward, you don't create feature branches. There's no code freeze, because in trunk-based methodology, the main rule is that trunk has to be releasable at all times. At any time, it doesn't matter. It might be 8 a.m., 2 p.m., Friday night, weekend, Christmas. It doesn't matter. At any point in time, trunk must be buildable and production ready. If you still have problems with visualizing what a trunk in trunk-based means, and you like mnemonics, like me, I like to think of it as this. This is trunk, and how your work with Git looks like. I actually find it quite funny with this quote. Branches create distance between developers, and we do not want that. And that's true. In trunk-based methodology, we integrate the code on a daily basis. Every developer is required to push to trunk at the end of the day, or multiple times a day, just so we don't create merge conflicts, right? We integrate the code right now. If two teams diverge for some reason, you're going to know it straight away, because you see what's happening, right? And that's the very much difference from feature branches and Git flow. The second rule of trunk is that we do not break the trunk. But of course, we're human, and things like that happen. And what should you do if something happens like it? Preferably, your CI should detect that there was a faulty commit, which doesn't build, the tests doesn't come through, or I don't know, it might be like bad Kubernetes configuration. I don't know. Whatever happens bad, you have to detect it and roll it back immediately. Don't be this guy who committed code on Friday afternoon and went on a party night. So the next concept in trunk-based development is feature flags. In marketing, it's called A/B testing, although we're not really A/B testing, but you could do it. But feature flags are toggles for a certain feature to be turned on and off. It might be like environment variable. It might be also like a third-party service, like LaunchDarkly, for example, where you set up a feature flag, and you can also select for what percentage of users would you want this feature flag, this feature, to be visible to. Now, it's not only on front end, as it's here, but in trunk base, it's also on backend. So, what's the difference between feature branches and feature flags? They actually serve the same purpose. Both of them separate drafted code from production-ready code. There's no difference about that. But with feature branches, what it allows you to do to commit every day to the trunk, right, and integrate your code immediately. Feature flags also, that's very important, especially after some time when you introduce them. After a month of releasing the feature to 100% of user base, you are required to clean it up. It's very important because technical debt is growing, and the more feature flags you have, the more complicated and stateful the code becomes. You can imagine how hard it is to get around somebody else's code, and how hard it is to get around somebody else's code who doesn't clean feature flags. That's so much harder. There's many different softwares that you could use, like LaunchDarkly, at Zaplify. We use LaunchDarkly, and it's been working great for us. I can totally recommend it. But there's also other solutions like ConfigCat, Flagsmith. I saw that Datadog actually released feature flags as well. So if you use that Datadog, you might just give it a try. So is deployment and release the same thing? And if you haven't heard about trunk base, your answer most probably would be yes. But in trunk base, it's not actually, and that's what makes it stick. Deployment is when you push the code to production. What it enables you to do is this feedback loop of checking your code against a live environment. And a release is when you enable the feature flag after testing. Like, you should be either covering a feature flag turned on with automated tests, or if you don't do that, or you want to do that later on, at least it should be tested manually. Another concept is pair programming, and I guess you're familiar with what pair programming is, but I'm gonna just briefly mention it. It's when instead of having a single person working on the task, you put two people next to each other, and they develop this feature together. It's one person who writes code, and the second person is called navigator. And he thinks about what the next steps should be, what should be the next moves, and navigates the person writing the code at that time. And after an hour or so, they switch. And in trunk base, pair programming is considered a synchronous code review. So if you pair program a code, you shouldn't be needing most of the time, of course, a third person to review that code, because you just wrote it together, right? So this way, you get another gatekeeper from the way. Should every single commit be done by a team of two? I think it's you who decides, because it's called extreme way of programming, and that's for a reason. There might be things which don't need two people, right? Like small features, or when it's junior developer when it's junior developer, it might be better to just leave him alone, let him learn, without putting senior and junior together and actually might be wasting a lot of time. So take it with a grain of salt, and always choose the right tool for the job and what suits you at the end of the day. So what does this all mean in practice? Trunk-based is constant integration. That's the most fundamental truth about trunk-based. The process is not complicated, right? When you start a new feature, what you do, the first commit that you should do is creating a feature flag and pushing it. That's the first commit. The feature flag might be in multiple places. You might need a feature flag on front end and on back end, or maybe in many services, multiple places. It's totally understandable. Then you either per program the feature, and at the end of the day, you run automated tests and commit without code review, or you create a pull request and have someone check it. Like, both schools are kind of acceptable. It depends on you and how you think it's going to go for you. Once you commit your code, the deployment to production is triggered automatically and immediately. That's when you get this instant feedback, especially if your deployment pipeline doesn't take very long. It's also a very important aspect that you should keep it just reasonable. Like 2 hours of a CI/CD running the deployment pipeline won't work. You have to be more agile to make it work. And at the end, once the code is to production, the last step happens totally asynchronously. Like, most of the time, it's not developer who manages the feature flag of the code that he wrote. It might be a QA engineer who tests the code, and after he gives the green light, he enables it. Or it might be just writing automated tests. And when you cover it, then you could enable it as well. Trunk-based is also instant recovery. It's very important that whatever you do, you can recover at any point in time. One could argue that, oh no, like this commit or this feature that I do can't be recoverable. But of course, there's like a really small percentage of things that can't be done. Most of the time, it's just enough to split the feature as much as possible until you can actually make every commit recoverable with the help of feature flag as well. And the last one, I was talking to one of my friends the other day, and he's quite junior, and I was telling him about trunk-based, and he was like, "Oh man, like, do we do trunk-based? We just have one environment, which is production. We have one branch, and everyone is pushing straight to that branch. That sounds like trunk-based." And yeah, it kind of sounds like it, but that's not it. Like, trunk-based is a little bit more than that. You have to be very mindful about how you and what you push to production. Trunk-based gets off the way all the barriers and gatekeepers, so there's almost nothing in between a developer and a production environment. This almost nothing is a very important part, because without it, it's just very rough programming, and you shouldn't do that. If you don't do tests, automated tests, it might not be the best idea for you to try to implement trunk-based. I would suggest, if I were you, to first try to cover at least the basic functionalities. And once you have it, then you could start thinking about implementing trunk-based. Another thing is monitoring. Monitoring and testing everything on production. So I would totally recommend you, if you don't use it right now, to set up an APM, which is Application Performance Monitoring, to get insights into what's happening into your application. You could configure it so that every command, query, or event is being tracked, and you can associate it with a certain user, certain log, Or if you use RAM, you could even associate it with a front-end session recorded, which is amazing for debugging. And last one, whenever you enable a feature flag, especially if it's something big and critical, you want to make sure that you enable it only for a very small percentage of users, just so in case a catastrophe happens, and imagine people can't log in, for example, or there's like a payment issue. You want to make sure that everything works and that for this 10% of the user base, everything is working smoothly, like butter. And only after that, you enable the feature flag for 100% of the users. So let's check up at our guys. Michael still works at eCorp, but after implementing Trunkbase, he started to push his code every day. He's feeling so much better. He feels much more motivated because he doesn't have to solve any merge conflicts. If they happen, I don't know, one in like weeks, it's very small and tiny, and it's almost not worth mentioning. And he also loves to pair program. He's working remotely, and he actually quite missed the office and some interaction with other people. And once he started to develop features together, the social aspect came in. It's so much more fun for most of us to do things together, right? Of course, we want to sit by yourself from time to time, but at least in my opinion, doing something together is just more fun. And what changed also is that since he realized whenever he writes and commits, it's gonna land almost instantly on production, he started to test his code more. He stopped leaving the tests for the QA. It might be that he just pushed the code, he didn't even check if it builds, or it builds, but he didn't test it by himself. And it was QA's job to find it, which is very bad. And you can imagine why QA engineers in such a setup might be so much stressed. And Jack is still working as QA engineer at PyPiper. He totally forgot what a release branch is. Since implementing Trunkbase, he loved feature flags. He can test asynchronously from everyone else. There's no more huge releases containing like hundreds of commits and tens of thousands of lines of code. He can only go to his software of choice for feature flags, just enable it, test it, disable it if something goes wrong, create a new ticket with a bug, and no one blames him for a faulty release. It's no more his fault. He's not the gatekeeper. It might be that he disables feature flags, but he's not responsible for giving the green light for the whole release. That's just too big of a responsibility for one person to hold. So, just summarizing, should you deploy like Amazon? Should you be deploying 23,000 times per day? And my answer is that I don't know. Trunkbase is a big change in the flow of your company, and you have to talk to your team members. Like, it has to be a very mindful decision. There's many things to consider before actually taking that path. It might be team seniority. The more senior the team, the easier it is to implement Trunkbase. The less of a risk of actually downtime on production is. If the team is very junior, you might want to wait with that. And the second one is how grown up the project is. If a project is still in very early stage, but it's still on production, but you don't have things like a proper monitoring, a proper setup for debugging, etc., you might want to focus on that first and then move to Trunkbase at that point. Or if you don't have tests, that's also a thing to consider. Trunk isn't perfect just as anything else. Thank you.